Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating piece of literature, Maulana Maududi's deeply analytical commentary on Surah al-Ambiya, which, by the way, translates to the Prophets, from his incredibly renowned work, the Tafhim-ul-Quran. Look, if you're someone who loves exploring how ancient texts blend deep theology, rich historical context, and just pure sharp logic, well, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to be using the original Urdu source text to map out exactly how Maududi structures this massive complex commentary. So let's get right into it.
Everything in this commentary anchors back to this one massive, underlying philosophical question. Is the universe just a game, or is there a grand design? The source text presents this as basically the ultimate crossroads for human beings. How you answer this specific question, at least according to Maududi's breakdown of the surah, determines absolutely everything. It shapes how you live your life, how you treat the people around you, and how you view the entire cosmos. It's the core debate that we're going to trace to the entirety of today's explainer.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of such a dense text, we've structured our explainer around 5 key pillars. 1. Context and core conflict. 2. The argument for monotheism. 3. Signs in the universe. 4. Abraham and the idols. And 5. The ultimate justice.
Starting with Part 1, Context and Core Conflict.
To really understand the arguments being made here, we first have to understand the intense, almost suffocating environment where this message was originally delivered. Maududi's introduction right off the bat grounds us in this high-stakes historical reality. Looking at the text, he explains that Surah al-Ambiya was revealed during a period of massive conflict in Mecca. Prophet Muhammad wasn't just, introducing a fun new philosophical idea. In a vacuum, he was actively challenging the established power structures of the Quraysh leadership. The commentary makes it crystal clear. This was a deeply entrenched social and political battle just as much as it was a theological one. The text essentially maps out this escalating timeline of tension. Think of it like a pressure cooker. In the early Meccan period, the message of monotheism gets introduced. And sure, it's met with skepticism. Then, by the mid-Meccan period, as the movement actually starts gaining some traction, that skepticism turns into serious societal friction. But by the late Meccan period, which is exactly when Maududi places the revelation of this surah, we are dealing with intense, organized, top-down conflict. The Quraysh leaders are actively trying to suppress the message, mostly because it completely threatens their entire way of life and, frankly, their economic system.
So how did the Quraysh fight back? Well, the commentary highlights that instead of actually debating the logic of the Prophet's message, they relied on dismissive smear tactics. They'd call him just a poet or a sorcerer. They claimed his revelations were nothing but muddled dreams, and constantly kept pointing out that, hey, he's merely a mortal human who eats and walks in the exact same markets as us. Maududi points out that these specific accusations were totally strategic. They were designed to invalidate the messenger, so the masses wouldn't even bother paying attention to the actual logic of the message itself.
Which brings us to Part 2, the argument for monotheism.
When the text strips away all those social smear campaigns from the Quraysh, what is the core logical argument it's actually making? Well, to understand that, we first need to define Tawheed. This is the absolute bedrock concept of monotheism in Islam, the indivisible oneness of God. The entire commentary of Surah al-Ambiya is essentially a masterclass in arguing for Tawheed over polytheism. Because see, the text doesn't just blindly dictate belief. It attempts to logically deconstruct the entire idea of having multiple deities.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Maududi breaks down that logic. He analyzes this specific deduction against the Quraysh's polytheism by arguing from the standpoint of, cosmic administration. Think about it like a giant organization. The commentary posits that a universe as cohesive and systematic as ours simply could not function with multiple administrators. If there were different gods with different wills, like multiple CEOs trying to steer a company in opposite directions, the text argues they would inevitably clash, and the whole universe would literally just tear itself apart.
And this is perfectly captured in the verse that Maududi translates and explains here. If there were gods beside Allah in the heavens and the earth, both would have been in a state of disorder. It's a direct, purely logical challenge. The text is asking the reader to just look around at the seamless operation of the universe, from the stars all the way down to the earth, and conclude that this singular, unified system points directly to a singular, unified creator.
All right, moving on to Part 3, Signs in the Universe.
The text doesn't just stay up in the clouds with abstract philosophy. It points directly to observable physical phenomena. Here, Maududi's commentary delves deep into verses that urge humans to actually observe the meticulous creation of the heavens and the earth.
The text basically frames the entire physical cosmos as this giant, undeniable set of evidence. He argues that people are walking right past profound miracles every single day, completely blind to the fact that these natural laws point directly back to that concept of Tawheed we just talked about.
So what specific signs does the text cite? Maududi highlights verses pointing out that all living things originate from water, which, by the way, is a profoundly accurate biological statement. It points to the mountains acting as massive stabilizers for the Earth's crust, and it draws attention to the sheer mind-boggling scale of cosmology, specifically the sun and the moon moving in these exact unending orbits without crashing into one another. It's truly awe-inspiring how the commentary uses everyday physical realities to argue that such flawless engineering inherently requires a single master engineer. It bridges natural observation and theology beautifully.
Part 4. Abraham and the Idols.
Now, the text shifts gears from cosmological evidence to a historical narrative, using the prophet Abraham as a brilliant practical case study in challenging the status quo. Across these pages, Maududi details the story of young Abraham confronting his entire society, a society that was deeply, deeply entrenched in idol worship. The text uses this narrative to directly mirror the exact struggle the Prophet Muhammad was having with the Quraysh in Makkah. It's showing us that this battle between rational monotheism and inherited blind tradition, it's a repeating cycle in human history.
Okay, you have to hear how Abraham actually exposes them, because it's brilliant. The text outlines this sequential trap he sets. First, he publicly questions why on earth they're worshiping lifeless, powerless statues. When they completely ignore his logic, he waits until the city is empty and physically breaks all the smaller idols. But, and here is the genius move, he leaves the largest idol perfectly intact. When the furious townspeople return and demand to know who did this, Abraham simply points to the large idol and challenges them to ask it who committed the act. Of course, they are forced to admit the statue can't speak or defend itself, which effectively traps them in their own illogical beliefs. It's just a powerful, clever narrative tool used in the text to utterly dismantle polytheism.
And finally, Part 5. The Ultimate Justice.
After establishing the history, the logic, and the physical signs, the commentary lands on the ultimate consequence of it all. In this section, Maududi details the concept of the mizan, which translates to the exact, unyielding scales of justice on the Day of Judgment. The commentary really shifts tone here from an argument to a serious warning. It outlines a scenario of absolute accountability, basically asserting that human beings are not just left to wander the earth without consequence. Every choice, every action, and every denial of those clear signs we talked about, it all has an exact weight.
The text draws a sharp, honestly terrifying contrast right here. On one side, you have the human heedlessness of the Quraysh, folks living as if life is merely a game, totally distracting themselves and stubbornly ignoring the profound logical and physical signs all around them. But then, on the flip side, you have divine justice. And we're talking about scales so exact and unyielding that the commentary literally notes even an action the weight of a tiny mustard seed is brought forward and accounted for. There is simply no escaping the math of this ultimate justice.
Which brings us right back to our anchor question, and leaves us with a final, really provocative thought derived directly from Maududi's commentary. If the universe isn't just a game, if it really operates on a grand design where every single atom of our actions is eventually weighed on the ultimate scales of justice, how does that change the way you live your life today? It is a heavy, deeply philosophical question, and one the text insists we absolutely cannot afford to ignore. Thank you so much for joining me as we unpack these incredibly dense and fascinating insights from the Tafhim al-Quran. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.